It is always good to see you. My name is Seth Brown. If we haven't had the chance to meet, if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn with me to Luke chapter 10. I'm going to meet you there in just a couple of moments. But this morning, we are going to just be discussing something that some have called the socially acceptable killer of your souls. You ready for a fun one today? I know that sounds dramatic, but I am convinced that the topic that we're going to address today really does warrant this type of power and warning. That there's this socially acceptable killer of our souls that many of us, it's all around us. It's hidden in plain sight, but maybe we don't recognize it. It's hidden in many of our answers to really, really simple questions that you get asked all the time. Like the question, how are you doing? What have you been up to lately? The common response to these questions is some variation of, I'm doing pretty good, just busy. I'm staying busy. Or, this is a crazy time of year for us, really no matter what time of year it is. And as you can see, this socially acceptable soul killer that we're going to be discussing today is what you could call busyness. Busyness is a destroyer of your soul. There is a lady named Corrie ten Boom who once said, if the devil can't make you sin, he will make you busy. And I know this sounds dramatic, but hopefully by the end of this, you'll realize why this is so important. There's another really interesting book. A lot of you guys have heard of a fellow named C.S. Lewis. He wrote some fascinating books. One book that is one of his more popular ones is called Screwtape Letters. And that book is, it's a fictional book about a senior demon mentoring and writing letters to a younger demon about how to pull a new Christian away from their faith. And so it's a fascinating read. If you read it, it's all inverted. So when the demon refers to as the enemy, it's of course talking about God. And in one of the chapters, what's happening is the senior demon is trying to encourage the junior demon, so to speak, to tap into the temptation of distraction or busyness in order to draw this new Christian away. And this is a quote from the book that I thought was really interesting. It says this is a senior demon talking here. You'll say that these, busyness or distraction, are very small sins, and doubtless, like all young tempters, you are anxious to be able to report spectacular wickedness. But do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy, which is God. Distraction, hurry, and busyness, this type of lifestyle, what it does is it gets you so focused on doing all of these activities that you forget about your primary identity. And it makes you miss God when he might be right there in front of you. But I want to be clear, before you check out on me, the purpose of this message is not to clear your calendar completely and everybody move to a monastery and become a monk. That is not really the point. If you look at the New Testament, what you'll see that Jesus was pretty busy. He was so busy that he'd have to wake up before the sun was up, go into the wilderness to pray just so he could get some time alone with the Father. The disciples were very busy. The early church fathers were very busy. So it's not about what you have on your calendar. The point with Jesus and the disciples and these guys and these women is they were busy with the right things. They were busy with the right things. They were busy doing the priorities that God had set before them, and they also were anchoring their activities in their relationship with Jesus. So they brought Jesus with them to where they were going. They brought Jesus with them to work, so to speak. So when I say busyness or hurry, I'm not talking about how open or clear your calendar is necessarily. You can have a very full calendar and still have a soul that moves at God's pace remembering who he is, being consciously aware of who he is, and then acting out of your relationship with him. Now, to be clear, I think some of us, frankly, do probably need to cut things from our calendar. Some of us do literally have too much. But the Bible is not against having a lot to do. The Bible is against having the wrong priorities and the wrong pace. That's what the Bible is going to speak to, and that's what our story is going to speak to. The disciples and Jesus, their priorities and their pace, they were defined by God. They brought Jesus where they went, and that really leads us to the big idea of what we're going to talk about today in this very familiar story that you may have heard before. And the big idea is simply this: sitting at the Lord's feet will change your priorities and will change your pace. Sitting at the Lord's feet is going to change your priorities and it's going to change your pace. So let's dive into our story. We're going to pick up in Luke 10, starting in verse 38. It's the story of Martha and Mary. If you've heard this before, then I hope we'll get a fresh look at it and be challenged by God to put him before us once again. Let's read God's word, starting in verse 38. Now as they, the disciples and Jesus, went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So here's what's going on leading up to this story. Luke chapter 10, this is the part of the journey of Jesus in Luke's gospel where he's starting to turn his face towards Jerusalem. He's starting to move towards Jerusalem for his final time where he's going to be crucified and then, of course, rise again. On his way to Jerusalem, things start to heat up a little bit. His ministry starts to reach a fever pitch. He's having more clashes with the religious leaders, which are fascinating. It's like they're nearly constant when you start in Luke 10 and read up to the point of his crucifixion. But also what's happening is as he's going towards Jerusalem, he is inviting more people to follow him and participate in his kingdom. And the surprising people that often say yes to the invitation of Jesus are the lowly, the nobodies, the broken. The social outcasts, those who are lowest on society's hierarchy. And so you've got this interesting thing. Those who are high on the social hierarchy, the religious leaders, they are rejecting Jesus and arguing with him. Those who are low, who are broken, who know their need for God, they are joining his ranks. They're joining his team and they're following him. This story we're reading today, it actually comes off of a fascinating interaction that Jesus has with one of these religious leaders. What happens is this religious leader walks up to Jesus and basically they get in a conversation about what's the most important commandment. And this religious leader, who's called the lawyer in the passage, which is basically just a Bible nerd, they say, well, the most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus says, good answer. That's great. Then this religious leader, what he does is he tries to justify himself and really who constitutes his being his neighbor and who is he actually obligated to love. So this guy says, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor then? Who is he? And then Jesus tells the parable that you've probably heard before, the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is where this guy gets robbed, he gets beaten, and he's left for dead. And then there is a priest in the Jewish order who walks by and ignores him. There's a Levite who's also a high-profile Jew who walks by this guy who's left for dead and doesn't help him. And then a Samaritan who the Jews hated ends up helping this guy who is left for dead. He mends his wounds, he puts him in a hotel, he pays for the hotel, and he helps him. And then Jesus says, who was the guy who acted like the neighbor? Of course, it's the Samaritan. So in the previous story, Jesus tells us how to love our neighbors. In our story today, we're going to look at how do we actually love God? This is a case study in devotion and love for Jesus. And if you're like me, when you read this story, this case study on devotion and love for Jesus, many of us, when we read the story, we see that Martha is obviously not the protagonist in the story, but we also simultaneously identify with her. I know for a fact that there's many people in this room who came in here today exactly like Martha. Distracted, anxious, troubled, maybe irritable. These are things that we often bring with us everywhere we go, and they are signs that our heart is hurried. They're signs that we are living a life outside of our own limits. I know in my life, the people closest to me, my friends and my family, the times that they feel most unloved by me is when I am in a hurry. When I am troubled, anxious, and distracted. Have you ever been talking to somebody while they're clearly thinking about something else? You know, like one of a telltale sign that the conversation isn't going great is when you see somebody look at their watch. What does that automatically signal to you? Oh, we need to end this thing. What if you're spilling your heart out to somebody and then they do the quick? They try to do it quick, but you always see it. You know? You don't feel loved. You don't feel heard. You don't feel valued in those moments because the reality is it is impossible to love somebody when you're in a hurry. You can't do it. You can't do it. Hurry and love are incompatible. They just, they truly are. Some people get hurt by us and we don't even know we've hurt them because we're moving so fast. And so that's why this is such an important topic that we've got to face. And so what we're going to do is as we look at this story, we're going to see what true love and devotion looks like for God, and it's going to help change our priorities and also change our pace. Let's get introduced to our characters, read the first few verses again, and see who we're dealing with here on a deeper level. Verse 38 says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching." So we got two main characters besides Jesus. You've got Martha, who takes the expected role of the host. And then you've got her sister, Mary, who takes the unexpected role of disciple. She sits at Jesus' feet. That's a phrase that's used in the New Testament to describe somebody who is a disciple of Jesus. So let me kind of just highlight a few things that are important about Mary's response to Jesus first. To us, when we see that Mary sat at Jesus' feet, if you're like me, you probably think, yeah, that seems like a pretty reasonable move. We understand what we're dealing with when it comes to Jesus. I think that'd be pretty cool if he came to our house. We'd probably drop everything and hear what he had to say because that'd be very fascinating. But just remember, in this story, they didn't get the full picture of who Jesus was yet. They knew he was a man of high esteem and high honor, but they did not know the full picture yet. Plus, on top of that, Mary does something that was completely countercultural in the first century. In the first century, women were typically not allowed to sit at the feet of a rabbi. Remember, Jesus was a rabbi in the Jewish tradition, and women were typically not allowed to sit at their feet. But what we see here is not only does Mary do what's countercultural, but Jesus actually says she's made a good choice in doing so. And as a side note, if you read about Jesus' interactions with women through the Gospels, he is constantly elevating the status of women as opposed to where they were at in the first century culture. And that's what he's doing right here as well. But when you think about Mary, what she's doing, that probably created a little bit of tension in the room. Have you ever been in a meeting or seen somebody else who's in a meeting that is like a little bit above their pay grade? You know, like maybe you're sitting in the meeting room at work and the bosses come in and you're not really paying attention and they start having a meeting that you weren't really used to being a part of. I know that's happened to me before, and I'm sure you probably could understand the analogy there, but that's basically what's happening to Mary. Is everyone in the room would think, what is she doing here? But she didn't care because she's so focused on Jesus. So that's Mary, right? Then we've got Mary's sister Martha. Martha, on the other hand, sister, that was a pretty, that was a slip of the tongue. Martha, on the other hand, she takes the role of host. She takes the role of host, which was expected. In the first century, hospitality and hosting was such a big deal. It was a much bigger deal than it is today. For Martha, she's actually doing a good thing by hosting Jesus because it's a sign of honor how you serve somebody when they're invited into your home. So Martha, notice, is not doing anything bad on the surface. She's actually choosing a good thing. But what we're going to find out is Martha is going to choose a good thing at the expense of choosing the greatest thing. Much of the activities on your calendars are not bad, but they may not be the portion that lasts forever. They might be a decent priority, but it may not be the greatest priority. And that's the mistake that we see Martha make. In our culture, there's not a lot of great analogies for the importance of hospitality. I think one that came to mind for me was you can think about hosting Thanksgiving, especially if you're hosting Thanksgiving for the first time. You're having distant relatives into your home who you don't see that much. And what happens is there's so many logistics, there's so many plates that you got to get ready at the right time that you often will focus so much on the meal if you're the host that you don't end up spending as much time with the company. And something might not go great with a meal. You might burn something. The turkey might be dry, whatever. You're worried about that instead of worried about, Uncle Tommy over there and what he's doing. And you're worried about the food and you're not worried about the people. Some of you host on purpose so that you can avoid talking to your Uncle Jimmy about politics and stuff like that. I've seen Thanksgivings where people come into the kitchen and just start stirring stuff that they don't need to stir just to avoid a conversation with the crazy aunt or uncle. But the reality is, this is what can happen to us. The purpose of Thanksgiving is not to have necessarily the best food you've ever eaten. It's supposed to gather together and give thanks. But often we don't do that. We get worried about the sweet potato casserole, right? And so that's the type of situation that Martha finds herself in. She's serving, she's scurrying around, she's busy, and we see Martha's heart is revealed as we keep reading and see what happens in verse 40 when she says this. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. So we see the first sign that Martha is choosing the wrong priorities and operating at the wrong pace. The text says that she is distracted with much serving. She's doing too much. And because she's doing too much, her priorities are out of line and her pace is out of line. Her priority was to host an honorable man. Her pace was too much too fast, and out of line priorities and pace lead to an overwhelmed, distracted, and anxious heart. But before we get too critical of Martha, I do want to commend her for something, and this is something that I say pretty frequently because it's that important. What Martha did, which was positive, is Martha turns her frustration into an honest plea to the one person who could really do something about it. And we don't even know if she was thinking about talking to Jesus. It was just this moment, and you probably had these before, where you're so fed up, you're so frustrated, you can't contain it, and you just say the thing that you've been stuffing. And she may have been stuffing that for 10 minutes. It may have been longer. It could have been hours. But all we know is she comes to Jesus, and she is honest. She's honest. And what we'll find is that when she's honest, Jesus does not shame her or guilt trip her, but he does lovingly and gently correct her. But here's the reality, guys. Many of us feel what Martha is feeling, but we are not getting honest with God about it. We're trying other strategies to deal with it. And the simple reality is God cannot change and transform that thing in your life unless you are brutally honest about it. Unless you own it. No halfways, no living in denial, no covering it up, but simply coming before God, saying what the issue is, saying what your feelings are about the issue, and then seeing what happens next. Because here's what I can promise you. God will not always agree with you, but if you are willing to be transformed, God will always work with you and participate with you in transforming you. He will do it. And Jesus actually gives Martha a new way to look at this situation because she came to him and she was honest. But guys, we know this principle to be true. We just often struggle to do it. If your car is not working right, you have to acknowledge something's wrong with my car. I better take it to a mechanic. If you're broke at the time, typically what you do is you say, it's probably not that big of a deal. It's probably nothing. The noise will probably fix itself if I drive faster or if I turn the music up. Have you ever had a car where you just listen to the music a lot louder so that you can ignore all the problems with it and all the noises with it? That is a great analogy for what we do in our own lives when we have problems. Oftentimes when we have problems, whether they be emotional or practical or circumstantial, we just turn the noise up in our lives. We add more distractions. We add more volume. We add more social media. We add whatever it takes to avoid the problem. But you got to turn that stuff down, be honest before God, and let him change you. You've got to just own it. Our kids, they're always wanting to try new things. And we want them to try new things. We want them to learn new things. But what they do is they often will try things that they aren't ready for. And if you're the control freak parent, like I can tend to be, at your worst, what you'll do is when they try stuff that is going to maybe make you late to that thing, or they try stuff that is going to make a big mess, then you try and go and do it for them. And then when I go and try and do it for them, what happens is they get frustrated because they didn't get to try. I get frustrated because they're frustrated. And then everybody's frustrated, and we got a bunch of Marthas in the mix here. But when I'm thinking soberly, what I'll do if our child wants to try something new is I'll let them try the thing, as long as it's safe. Like if they're trying to light off fireworks, then of course we're not going to let that happen. As long as it's safe, they'll try whatever it is that they're trying. We'll let them fail themselves, and then they realize their need for help. And then we can help them. Guys, it's no different in our relationship with God as his children. We've got to just own it and do what Martha does and just be real about it. But here's a few signs that you might be like Martha, and then we'll talk about what we do when we're overwhelmed. If you find yourself pretty regularly irritated, if you find yourself pretty regularly restless, or if you find yourself lacking purpose in the activities of your life, you might have hurry sickness. You might have this busyness that's starting to shrivel up your soul. And what we do when this happens is we do the same thing that Martha does. Let's look closely at her response. We'll see what she does, because it's the same thing that we do when our priorities and our pace are out of line. She says to Jesus, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." Tell her to help me. There's two things we do when we're overwhelmed, when our pace and priorities are out of line. Is one, we play the victim. Two, we find other people to blame. We'll talk about each of these things briefly. We play the victim, and we find someone else to blame. In Martha's response to Jesus, notice she says me 3 times. Do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. Me. When you're this busy, you don't have time to reflect and see how you're contributing to the issue. And you focus only on how the issue is affecting you, and maybe you're part of the problem. So she plays the victim. And we tend to do the same thing. The problem with busyness, and the reason Satan loves to use it as a strategy to bring you or to lead you to a life away from God, is because when you are busy, you do not have time and you do not have the capacity to actually reflect on if you could be part of the problem. You just assume everyone else is the issue. It's like this inability to be wrong. And honestly, this is what destroys most of our relationships. If you're in a relationship where you can't be wrong, that relationship is not going to be healthy. And sometimes that stems from this fact that you just simply don't move at a pace where you can reflect. I don't know how old these commercials are, but there's commercials out there pretty recently where a family will have like some sort of dispute and then they'll throw a challenge flag, which a challenge flag in football is when you do a replay to see if the referee made the right call. And then in marriages or in friendships, sometimes you desperately wish you could do that, where you could just go to the instant replay and see if you said the thing that the person is accusing you of saying, or see what your tone was like when somebody says, I wasn't yelling, or I wasn't irritated. You probably had that discussion with a spouse or a friend before about an instant replay. But what I think, my hypothesis, is that if we actually had instant replay, we would be humbled by how wrong we are most of the time. We'd be humbled by it. That we don't even have necessarily the self-clarity to know how we come off. But you know what is like a spiritual instant replay? Time alone with God. Because what happens is he'll bring stuff to the surface of your mind, and then you can actually deal with it with God. But if you move too quick and you have hurry sickness, then busyness will create this victim mentality where you just think about what's going on with you and how things are wrong with everyone else. And that's why first you play the victim when your priorities and pace are out of line. And then what you do naturally is you just find somebody else to blame. You find somebody else to blame. In Martha's case, she blames Mary. Mary is the problem. She's supposed to be hosting with me, and she's sitting at the feet of Jesus instead. And what's a sobering truth to think through is that if anything other than Jesus is the center of your life, you can't help but worry about what other people are doing. If Jesus is the center of your life, typically you look in the mirror before you look outside yourself. But if anything else is the center of your life, you can't help but complain about what other people are doing. For example, if your primary thing in life is your work, what's the thing that you complain about? Your coworkers. What they're not doing, how they're not performing, how irritating they are. If the center of your life is your home, then the things that you complain about are your spouse and your children if you have them. If your friendships is the center of your life, then you are super concerned about what everyone else is thinking of you and why didn't they invite me to that thing? And I wonder if this person is mad at me. And I can't believe they said that. And when these things are the center of our lives, we find people to blame and we talk about other people. But when Jesus is the center of your life, it's not that these things won't impact you, because the irritating person at work can still impact you. But then when you have margin to sit at the feet of Jesus, you actually deal with that, get released from it, and can come back to the joyful beginning once again. So we play the victim. We find people to blame when our priorities and our pace are out of line. But thankfully, Martha happened to bring her complaint to the one person who loves her enough to be honest. She does the one thing that actually helps her in the situation, and she brings her complaint to Jesus, and then we get to see closely how he responds to her in verse 41 when it says this. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Notice a few things about Jesus' response. It is a response of love. He repeats her name twice as this gentle sign of acknowledgement. He recognizes her feelings in the midst of this busyness, but then he gently gives her a new way to see her situation. He says, hey, you're worried about a lot of things, specifically related to the serving and to the food. But I'm here to tell you, Mary has chosen the food that will last. Mary has chosen the portion that will not be taken away from her. He gives her a new story. And as a side note, I've said this before, but the first story you tell yourself in any given interaction or situation is typically the wrong story. A silly example would be if you're walking through the hallway at work, your coworker doesn't acknowledge you, they don't say hi to you, you try to say hello and they walk right by you. You might tell yourself all sorts of stuff about that. You might say, what did I do wrong? Are they mad at me? Did I say something to them? Did I check up on them when this happened? You might tell yourself all this stuff when in reality they maybe got 4 hours of sleep and are just acting like a zombie and just didn't even see you there. But often we tell ourselves this first story, then we believe it, we write this whole narrative in our heads, and we make things way worse than it actually is. But sitting at the feet of Jesus, what will happen is he'll give you a new way to see your circumstances. Because we know this, if you've been following Jesus for any amount of time, you know that when you bring things to God, he doesn't always change your circumstances, but he will change you in the midst of your circumstances. He'll change the way you see what's going on in your life. And that's what Jesus does with Mary or with Martha. He gives her a new way to see things. But think about this, guys. I know this is true for many of us in this room. You feel like Martha. You're busy. You feel your soul kind of shriveling up. The things that made you joyful don't really make you joyful anymore. Maybe there's more irritability and restlessness and lack of purpose. Many of you feel this way, and the good news for you today is that Jesus wants to invite you to bring that to him so that he can walk with you through whatever it is that's going on. If you've chosen the wrong things for no matter how long you've done them, they may even be good things. Jesus is inviting you back to him. Remember at the beginning when I said Mary was like the person who sits in a meeting that was kind of above their pay grade? She's sitting in the meeting that she doesn't really belong in. Jesus is inviting you to participate and to sit at his feet, a meeting that you and I never belonged in the first place. And the way we know he's inviting us to sit with him is the great lengths and the high price he has paid to give you access to him. In this story, he's on his way to Jerusalem to die for you so that you can choose the good portion. So that you can sit at his feet and eat the food that lasts forever. Jesus is so unlike anything in our culture today. Think about Jesus compared to a high-profile professor. If you want to sit under the feet of a high-profile professor and learn from him or her, you've got to have the right credentials, you've got to have the right money, you got to know the right people, you got to get into the school, you got to do all the work, and then maybe you apply and have a chance to sit under somebody who has all this knowledge to give you. And yet Jesus, as the greatest teacher to ever walk the earth, and as God himself, he has paid the entry fee, he has given you the credentials, and he is actually inviting you to come and sit with him at his feet. He doesn't come to you and shame you for missing your quiet time, and shame you for not reading your Bible enough, and shame you for not praying hard enough. He simply says, come sit, come sit. This is the heart of God. He says this very same thing in Matthew 11 when he says, come to me, all who weary and are heavy laden. For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Sit with me and learn from me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is the invitation that Jesus extends to you. And here's the reality. I get that what life does, and life often will choke out our passions because we get more and more responsibilities as we get older. It'll choke out the things that drew us to God in the beginning. And even No matter how far you've walked, no matter how messed up your priorities are right now, he calls to you and he comes to you just as he does with Martha and says, I know you're distracted. I know you're troubled. I know there's so much on your plate, but come sit. Choose the good portion. Here's the reality. Jesus' purpose for your life is to transform you into his image. Transforming you into his image means changing you into a person of love. The way that you become a person of love is not by reading about love, it is by experiencing it. The people who become people of love are those who experience love. That is the essence of why we sit at the feet of Jesus. You let God love you in those moments. And loving you does not mean agreeing with all of your desires, by the way. Loving you means I'm going to tell you what you need to hear, and I'm going to do so gently, lovingly, and I'm going to treat you as a son or daughter, which is exactly what God does. And what gets in the way of God's purpose for you, which is to become somebody of love, is hurry, because hurry and love are incompatible. You cannot love God and you cannot love your neighbors when you're in a hurry. You simply can't. That's why busyness is such a common strategy of Satan, because he knows that you cannot love God and others properly while you are busy. So Jesus this morning, right now, he's inviting you to sit at his feet, to get a new set of priorities that he defines, and to operate at a new pace, to bring him with you on the way to your responsibilities. So let me ask you this one question. What's the one thing in your life that you've made necessary that maybe is not necessary? Because I'm convinced that the sober reality is that many people will make it to the end of their life and they will realize that maybe they did a lot of quote unquote good things, but they neglected the greatest thing. The opportunity to sit at Jesus' feet is the opportunity to experience eternity right now. To get out of the tunnel vision of your circumstances and to step back and see something bigger that God is writing. What's the one thing that you've made necessary that maybe is not necessary? What do you give your attention and devotion to, and what gets your leftovers? For many of us in here, the thing that falls off the map first when we get busy and stressed is our time with God. And I'm talking about your time with God in the morning, if that's what you do. I'm also talking about bringing Jesus to work, bringing Jesus to school, bringing Jesus to wherever you go, because a relationship with God that is anchored is keeping him front of mind as much as possible, even through your normal day. It's like that text you send to a friend or a spouse in the middle of the day to let them know you're thinking about them. That's the same thing you do in your relationship with God. Where does your mind drift when you're not doing anything active? Because that's typically the thing that we have centered our lives on. So what I want to do this morning is I want to give you an opportunity for simply an honest evaluation of your priorities before God. Just an honest appraisal. And remember, Jesus does not come to you with shame and with guilt. He may come to you with gentle and loving correction, but you can't experience transformation unless you get honest about what it is you're putting first in your life. The question I want you to take before God this morning is simply, what is the one thing that I've made necessary that's not? And then simply sit at his feet, listen to him, talk to him, be honest. We're going to do response time as we always do, and this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to give you time to reflect on that one question. What is the one thing I've made necessary that's not necessary? You can repent. You can talk to God. Some of you may want to come up front and hit the altar and pray. This morning, we're not going to have our prayer team come up. We want you to specifically focus between you and the Lord. But we still want the altar open for you. And you take as much time as you need to pray, you and God. And when you're ready to stand and sing with conviction, as soon as you're ready, whether it takes the whole song or 10 seconds, then you stand and you sing with us. But I want to pray over you. And as soon as I'm done praying, stay in a spirit of prayer with your heads bowed and your eyes closed. You can go ahead and do that for me right now. And then you continue to bring this before the Lord and be invited back to sit at his feet. Father, I pray that you give us an understanding of your love today, unlike we've experienced in a very long time. I pray that regardless of our busy schedules, that you help us to come back to you, to sit at your feet, to experience your loving kindness, to not hide from you as our first parents did in the garden, but to run to you. To cry out to you and to be completely honest in your presence. I pray you give us this freedom in the coming moments that would lead to a trajectory of a changed life. Let us come back to you. We love you and pray these things in Jesus' name. Continue to pray in your own seats and stand and sing when you're ready.